Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is that you are watching this. I'm Larry Erickson. This is the Erickson Report. So, that happened. In the weeks following the November election, I told you that this is not over. And as evidence, I pointed to the increasingly violent rhetoric of the right wing, rhetoric more recently supplemented by such as Representative Louis, I put the Gomer in Gomert, openly calling for violence in the streets, and insane even for Trump world lawyer Lynn Wood, threatening Vice President Mike Not Worth a Farthing with execution if he didn't go along with Tweety Pie's plan to simply ignore the results of the election and install pro-Trump alternate delegate slates when it came time for Congress to certify the election. In the wake of that, and Tweety Pie screeching fraud, fraud, fraud like a deranged minor bird, the events of January 6th should have come as no surprise. In fact, it should not have required any of the events since the election to have it be no surprise. We should have known that from like a year ago. In January of 2020, in discussing Tweety Pie's tendency, drive, whatever you care to call it, towards extreme authoritarian one-person rule, I cited cases where he ignored, or at least seriously considered ignoring, federal law, sometimes the courts, sometimes the Supreme Court, sometimes the Constitution. He even, I said, defies the idea of leaving office, apparently because those constitutional limits don't or shouldn't apply to him any more than any of the other ones do. I then cited 5 occasions in the previous year on which he had said that he would remain in office for 10 to 20 to 25 years, and at one point said, maybe we'll have to give that a shot. That, in this particular case, meaning being president for life. People insisted that he was just joking, that it was just to trigger the libs. But I concluded, sorry, when you go to the same well at least 5 times, that's not a joke. That's something you were thinking about. That, again, was a year ago. And I was hardly the first. I mean, well before, there were people who, before Tweety Pie even became president, who were warning about his authoritarianism. We knew. We had to know. And those who didn't know damn well should have known. Tweety Pie lived on, thrived on, built his power on, he relied on, stoking the kind of unfocused rage to be found among his and what became his supporters, and then pointing that rage in directions that would benefit him personally. And he's used his skill, and give the devil his due, his skill in manipulating that anger to cow his opponents within the GOP, who for 4 years shuffled and mumbled and tugged at their forelock and kissed the ring because they were so terrified at the horrible prospect of being primaried by his legions of followers, or put another way, lived in fear of possibly losing their job and crippling their political personal ambitions. We knew. We had to know. They knew. They had to know. And those that didn't know damn well should have known. In the days leading up to January 6th, former Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn predicted that millions of people would show up for his rally. And this is what, even as Tweety Pie, pro-Tweety Pie message board was stuffed with messages about an intention to be, a plan to be violent at the event. One planning graphic showed a map of streets around the Capitol that rioters wanted to obstruct to block Dems and rhinos. Rhinos, as you probably know, meaning Republicans in name only. Block Dems and rhinos from even getting to the Capitol. One of the hottest topics on that board was about people bringing their guns to Washington, D.C., which would be illegal. Others talked about breaking into federal buildings and attacking any law enforcement that might try to get in their way. One popular comment predicted literal war, and that's a quote, literal war on January 6th, and said, quoting, "We'll storm offices and physically remove and even kill all the D.C. traitors and reclaim the country." We knew. We had to know. Law enforcement knew. Law enforcement had to know. And any of those that didn't, damn well should have known. Which raises, though, a question that a lot of people have been asking. Why was there so little security on January 6th? Why was law enforcement so unprepared? Why did it take so long to organize a response? Why weren't they ready? There have been a lot of varied answers to those questions, ranging from wholesale screw-ups to deliberate official interference that hinder the ability of outfits such like the National Guard or the Homeland Security Forces to respond, even to actual law enforcement collusion with the rioters. But one thing needs to be considered seriously, because even if it isn't the whole answer, it is surely a part of it. It's the simple fact that the rioters were white. Because even though they talked about violence, even though they came, a significant number of them armed, even though they had been primed for, even incited to violence by their glorious leader at a rally immediately before, until they actually started coming through the windows, started coming over the walls, they just weren't seen as that threatening because they were white. And apparently white people just don't do that kind of thing. I mean, I never thought I'd applaud something that Claire McCaskill said, but while she wasn't the only one, she was the first one that I heard say we should close our eyes and imagine how different the response would have been if those had been black faces in that crowd instead of white ones. And that's not just speculation. Not only do we have the physical evidence, the pictures, the videos of how cops treated Black Lives Matter protesters over the summer, how dramatically that contrasted with the leniency showed to the insurrectionists on January 6th. But there have been a number of psychological studies that have found that people, especially, not exclusively, but especially white people, perceive black men to be more menacing, more threatening, more capable of inflicting harm than a white man of about the same age, height, weight, and build. And black boys are persistently perceived as being older than they actually are. Recall the case of Tamir Rice, the 12-year-old child shot down by 2 Cleveland cops back in 2014. They said they thought he was 20. And if black people are more menacing, more dangerous, that also means by definition that white people are less threatening, that they are less dangerous. Which means in turn that what happened on January 6th, why the police were so unready, why they were so easily overwhelmed, is at least partly due to structural racism. That sort of racism that affects our society to the point where it actually shapes our perceptions of physical reality. And it's a type of racism that underlies Tweety Pie's political base and therefore his political power. Like the old joke that you don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. You don't have to be a thoroughgoing racist to support Tweety Pie, but it sure as hell helps. Which actually relates to another part of January 6th, the congressional certification of the Electoral College vote, and specifically the objections that were raised to states' votes. Because the moves of Senators Josh Creepy Crawley Hawley and Ted Ooze were about precisely that, political power. Even as half of the Gopper senators who were going to join in their vapid, useless stunt dropped out, stunned and shamed into silence by the terrorist MAGA attack on the Capitol. These two persisted in 2 of their originally planned 5 or 6 objections. One to Arizona, which had already started when the attack occurred, and Pennsylvania, which was for some reason the focus of the anti-voting rights conspirators' concerns. The thing is, these guys, they knew the effort. They, assuming this theater of the absurd deserves that description, they knew it would fail. They knew it had no chance. For an objection to be upheld, it had to be upheld by both the House and the Senate, and no one thought that was going to happen. They knew Trump was on his way out, which in turn was the point. He's on his way out, which means that his supporters, depending upon what he thinks might be the most personally profitable to him after leaving office, but it means his supporters might be up for grabs. So the point here was not to win. It was to say, you did it. the better to position yourself as the true heir to the throne, the better to wrap yourself in the mantle of Tweety Pie's chosen successor. It's about their personal ambition, the ambitions that make them willing to push the lies, to push the "we was robbed" meme, to embrace the dangerous delusions and fetid fantasies that have come to mark what it means to be a gopper, to provoke the divisions and distrust, even with the results of that having just driven them into hiding from a mob that may temporarily go back into hiding, but is not going away. Because if you get nothing else from everything I'm saying, get this. Despite the certification, despite Tweety Pie finally pledging a peaceful transition, this still isn't over, and it won't be over on January 20th, and Senators Howler and Ooze know it. In fact, they're counting on it. That is, the whole objection theater was just a means of advancing their own power lust, and they don't care what they burn down in its pursuit. Which means, in turn, ultimately, that it's about what it's always about for the right wing. Power. Social, political, economic power. In fact, it's about that. It's about power so much that I can't even call what the two of them and the rest of the bozos, bastards, buffoons, and bosses with their voter ID laws, their voter suppression, their voter purges, their frothings about non-existing voter fraud. I can't even call what they're about anti-democratic because, in a very real sense, democracy has nothing to do with it. If the trappings, if the functionings of democracy will serve to keep them in power, then they're fine with it. But if it doesn't, they'll dump it in a heartbeat. It's not that they're anti-democratic. It's that they just don't give a flying damn about democracy one way or the other. They care about power and the benefits that they obtain from it. And of course, it is about the practical benefits that such power brings, the wealth, the riches, the lifestyle, which means, again, of course, part of the drive is pure, unadulterated greed, pure me first. But it's more. It's also about the sublime feeling of being in control of the destiny of others, of being able to feel and, in a practical sense, be superior to others, to be able to regard yourself as not just over others, but better than them, superior not just in position or in status, but in the very essence of self, to be able to feel, I'm better than you. And the way you maintain such power is, bluntly, by suckering the rubes. That mass of people to who you so much enjoy feeling superior, exactly the way Tweety Pie has so skillfully suckered his own followers. Convince them that you're ripping them off for their own benefit. Trick them, deceive them, manipulate them any way that you can into acting contrary to their own interests and instead advancing yours, never forgetting that facts matter less than feelings, that perception doesn't just overrule reality, it defines reality. As an example of the result, a study released at the very end of 2020 showed significant numbers of goppers, significant percentages of goppers, don't know what positions the party they're voting for holds, falsely believing that the goppers support protecting people with pre-existing health care conditions, they support expanding Medicaid, they support a $15 minimum wage, and they oppose allowing mining debris to be dumped into streams, which are the 4 issues covered by the survey. But turning voters into suckers for power is nothing new. 40 years ago, after Reagan was elected in 1980, I called it the ultimate triumph of image over substance, which was demonstrated clearly in 1984 when he ran for re-election against Walter Mondale. During that campaign, there was a survey that asked people about a variety of issues. Over and over again, clear majorities of people supported policy positions that were in line with Mondale's campaign. Over and over again, clear majorities of those very same people, when you asked them who they were voting for, said Reagan. Not ultimately for what he said or for what he proposed to do or what he had done, but because of how he made them feel. How do you do that? How do you keep the rubes in line? How do you get them to feel the way you want them to? You can always just lie to them, of course. But the main weapon is fear, as it always has been. Fear, a particular sort of fear, actually defines the right wing. The thing that psychologically unites conservatives across all categories of age, of biological sex, of economic class, even of race, is fear of change. You know the common experience that as people get older, they tend to get more conservative? That's because as we get older, we are less capable of dealing with change and so more fearful of having to do it. Fear of change has been used to drive opposition to any number of movements for social progress over the years, from feminism to LGBTQ rights, civil rights, economic justice, climate change, and more. It's never expressed that way, of course. Oh no, not directly. Rather, it's a matter of, if we do that, all of these terrible consequences will follow, even if they're just fantasies, and then letting people's imaginations do the real work. In fact, early on in the computer industry, Microsoft used a very similar sort of tactics in order to undermine and bring down a rival. They called it FUD, installing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But the go-to weapon for manipulation remains, as it so often has been, racism. The difference at this present moment is that the fear of change is real, and in fact it's inevitable. The U.S. is on track to, within a few decades, being what's called a majority-minority nation. That is one where more than 50% of the population is comprised of a combination of blacks, Hispanics, Asians, and other non-white residents. Whites would still be the biggest single group, but unlike today, they would not be a majority, and unlike today, it would not be merely misleading or incomplete to call the U.S. a white nation. It'd be completely, totally, obviously wrong. That is a concept that too many white people find frightening, and even if they don't know the demographic trends and the demographic facts, still they see the change occurring around them. The feeling of, it's all changing, it's all different. It's not the country I grew up in. And it's not, and it's not going to be. But that won't stop people from wanting it to be. What's important to realize now is that all those people you hear ranting about their intention to take back our country, they mean it in a very real sense. Because probably our most basic, even primal, social fear is the fear of the other, the not us. Racism, xenophobia, sexism, religious bigotry, homophobia, bigotries of all sorts have that common denominator. The target of the bigotry is the not us. What varies is who defines us in those different cases. So the unspoken answer to take the country back from who is take it back from the other, from the not us. But that very same prospect, the majority-minority rule, majority-minority country, creates a problem for the economic, social, and political elites that dominate our society, for the very people who look to exploit that fear of the not us to maintain their control. Because the problem is that it means the functionings of democracy can no longer be trusted to keep them in power, because over time fewer and fewer people are wedded to that way it used to be life, where being white was the default definition of us and the default definition of American. All the attempts at voter suppression, all the gerrymandering are attempts to hold off that day. But as recent events in Georgia have shown, those efforts have reached the point of diminishing returns, and in the easily foreseeable future will simply not be enough, as they will be overwhelmed by demographic reality. So we have the moves to greater, harsher, more extreme lengths, such as we have seen this time, including raising the possibilities of a military coup, of violence in the streets, of just ignoring the Constitution and federal law altogether, even of outright civil war. Prospects raised in order to legitimize them, to make them common currency, ultimately to make them less fearful than the ever-looming prospect of the not us, and so easier to implement when the trappings of democracy no longer serve. Now, the elites may not have invented these various possibilities. They may have originated, in some cases undoubtedly did originate, in the paranoid swamps of the fringes of the internet. But those elites, those powerful economic, social, and media forces did pick up on those possibilities, treated them respectfully, and so amplified them, then fed them back to those same fringes, even as at the same time as they pushed them to a wider audience. Now, that's not to say there was some kind of conscious, organized conspiracy to this end, or some sort of Illuminati-style cabal working off a planned schedule. But it is how the process of moving such ideas from the outlandish to the everyday, from the fringe to the mainstream, this is how it works in practice, and who it benefits. And it's exactly how we wind up with a mob of armed domestic terrorist insurrectionist yahoos storming the Capitol in the fervent belief that they are taking back their country, even as, according to a Newsweek poll, 45% of goppers agree with them. This is not over, and it won't be for a long time. But it is time for a break. And we are back. There is so much more that could be said about this. Every time I see a news item about it, I think something, oh yeah, that's something that deserves comment. It's impossible to do it all, so I'm just going to wrap this up with a couple of quick takes. So first, it's actually only been rather lightly reported that there were Tweety Pie supporting rallies in lots of places outside Washington, D.C. Most of them were peaceful, but not all of them. In Los Angeles, Tweety Pie troops clashed with police who declared an unlawful assembly. In Olympia, Washington, the governor and his family were moved to a secure location after some yahoos broke into the grounds of the governor's mansion. In Salem, Oregon, police had to declare an unlawful assembly to keep Tweety Pie acolytes away from the state capitol. In Phoenix, the crowd tried to break into the locked Capitol building, smashing a window in the process, while another group brought a guillotine with a letter saying that they are ready for war. In Atlanta, senior staffers, including Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, had to be escorted out of the Capitol building. And Georgia, Texas, Wyoming, Pennsylvania, New Mexico, and Utah took precautionary measures, such as closing their state legislative buildings for the day. Second, remember that I referred to the unfocused rage burning in Tweety Pie supporters. We would be wise to remember that for some, maybe a lot of these folks, they have genuine grievances, that they are no less liable to economic stresses and strains than the rest of us, that they are no less worried about their futures and the futures of their families than we are about ours. The reactionary corporate elites that dominate our economic lives have long excelled at taking that justified anger and directing it towards someone, anyone other than them. Excelled, that is, at getting people to blame the wrong targets. Around 1998, I think it was, Bill Clinton, of all people, offered an image of a stereotypical family, a working father, stay-at-home mother, a couple of kids, and the idea of a good life of sending their kids to college followed by a secure retirement. But now, he said, the father hasn't had a raise in a few years and thinks he might be laid off at any time, and he looks at his family and feels he let them down. What did I do wrong? It's easy, Clinton said, for that sort of person to respond to a hot 30-second ad saying you didn't do anything wrong, they did it to you. The point here being that the they surely is not the corporate bosses. The particulars may have changed in the intervening 20-plus years, but the game is the same. Third, in line with rule number 13 of my rules for right-wingers, the rule being when all else has failed and even when it hasn't, lie, we find various right-wing flakes and faux news hosts claiming that the mob that invaded the Capitol wasn't made up of Tweety Pie supporters, it actually was Antifa. Fourth, one good thing, because I suppose I can call it that, one good thing that came out of January 6th is that it seemed to break the spell that Tweety Pie had cast over a major part of the Gopper Party. People are breaking away from him, quitting the administration, openly criticizing him in a way that did not seem possible literally just days earlier. Now, it may be that they thought it would never go this far, that the forces they unleashed could be contained in a way that benefited them. Or it could be just a calculation that he won't be as potent a figure post-presidency as had been thought. In either case, it may not seem like much, since it would mean that we'll be dealing with ordinary reactionaries instead of fanatical ones, but I'll take what I can get. And we end with a clown award, given as always for meritorious stupidity. The winner this time is AFP, the French press agency. This picture has been going around to illustrate the difference in Washington, D.C. security between that on January 6th, with that shown here for a Black Lives Matter protest in D.C. in June. An AFP fact check declared the image misleading because it was labeled as security for the Capitol during the BLM protest, when in fact the demonstration was at the other end of the mall and the photo was actually the security for the Lincoln Memorial. And so the Clown Award goes to AFP for noteworthy achievement in straining at a gnat and utterly missing the point. All right, that's it for this time. I hope next time to get back to more usual stuff, doing a more usual show. But it's a lot of things to talk about. I mean, I want to talk about climate change. There's stuff about the economy I want to talk about, all kinds of topics that we want to get to. So hopefully we'll be able to do that more and more next week. But for now, I will just say that you hang in there. You have the best 2 weeks that you possibly can. Wear the damn mask, and peace.